In the last video, we talked about how complete device definitions are broken up into components, and we talked about how those components are related to each other. But in that whole conversation, I sort of glossed over the fact that metrics are broken up into two different components. We have metrics and we have metric instances. So what I want to do in this video is to look specifically at metrics and how those things are broken up and what the implications are to users. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, metrics are a little bit different because metrics can either run on the device or they can run on the server. Now again, a complete metric definition is composed of both a metric component and an instance component. Now what you'll see is that most metrics just have one of each. RMS, for instance, and peak-to-peak and speed. When we look at them in the console, you'll see that there is one metric component and one instant component for both, for all of those metrics. And if you open up and look at those components, like we did device and channel, you'll notice that most of the information is the same. But instances do enable us to make multiple, more specific versions of a metric. We use this in our standard devices for the metric called spectral band. We have an instance called 1x mag, we have an instance called 2x mag, we have an instance called subsynchronous. These are all instances of the spectral band metric. And furthermore, through the web, users can create even more instances of this metric and set up custom bands that they can assign to their channels. Another example that I can think of where this might be used is for a metric called sound level with exponential averaging. You could have an instance of that metric with standard time constants, slow, fast, impulse, or maybe even a custom time constant. The main point here is that most metrics have one metric component and one instance component, but instances do allow us to make multiple versions of the same metric. Now at some point I want to show this in the console, but first I want to show the implications of this in the web. So what I've done here is taken a screenshot of two tabs in the System Console section of the Systems Manager. This Features tab here under the Systems Console shows an aggregate list of all the metrics that are available on any device for any channel in InsightCM. The important point here is that every one of these metrics that you see here in this list are instances. They are of the instance component. And in fact, for the most part, when you're in the web, users are interacting with metric instances and not with metrics themselves. Even in the case of RMS, which you're looking at here, this is the one and only instance of RMS. Where the metrics come into play is here when you click on this Add button. This will now bring down a drop-down menu of all the metrics where users can create additional instances, and there is our spectral band metric. You'll notice that RMS and speed and peak-to-peak are not on this list. It is because in their metric definition there is a field which prohibits users from creating additional instances of that metric. Now if you go one tab over to the Channel Features tab, what you see here is again a list of metric instances, but over here is their keyword association. Metrics are not particular to a specific device because again the metric might not even run on the device, it might run on the server. Metrics are associated with types of channels. Like RMS, for instance, is typically calculated on acceleration channels. So what we have here under the Channels Features tab is the mapping between metric instances and channel keywords. And it's important to know that this isn't just some string pattern matched list. There is a field in the channel definition itself called keyword. That becomes the hook from which you can use to attach valid metrics or metrics that are valid for a particular channel. So here are our arrows. If a device can calculate a metric, then it declares that fact by specifically or explicitly mentioning that metric in its device definition. Also, instances of a metric have a list of keywords which associate them to channels where they are valid. So this accomplishes two things. This list here at the top informs the server whether a metric is going to be calculated on the device, and if it's not, then it's the server's job to perform that calculation. Furthermore, when the user is configuring their device, specifically configuring their channels, and they click a button to add features to that channel, this keyword association brings up a list of valid metrics for that channel. Again, we saw this in the last video. Briefly, we opened up the calculated metrics section in the device definition, and we saw explicit mentions of metric components. If we open up instance definitions, then we will see keyword declarations for valid channels. I bring up the spectral band metric definition to show this one field can create instance. Notice that it is true. This means that in the Systems console, when you're in the Features tab, you have the ability to click Add and select Spectral Band to create an additional instance of that metric. If this field is false, then when the metric is uploaded to the server will automatically create one and only one instance of that metric. And again, the whole end game here, when a user is configuring a channel, and he wants to add a metric to that channel, then the list that comes up is a list of all valid metrics for that channel. Before I conclude here, I want to go to the Systems console, and I want to run this command, list definitions -type metric. Then I want to run the command list definitions of type instance. So you will see that there's quite a bit of overlap here. Notice that RMS is a metric and an instance. Same for crest factor is in both, and speed is in both. But notice that spectral band, the metric, is nowhere to be found in instance. That is because 1x mag and 2x mag and subsynchronous and custom band are all instances of that metric.